A millionaire adopts quiet orphan 30 years ago. When he collapses at a meeting, she rushes to his side. No one expected what happened next. A story of transformation and connection that will warm your soul. Welcome back. Leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel and enjoy the story. The emergency room at Mayfair Memorial Hospital erupted into a flurry of activity as the double doors burst open. Nathan Wright, one of London's most formidable business magnates, lay unconscious. On a stretcher, his normally commanding presence now fragile and still. His executive assistant followed, clutching his phone and briefcase, face pale with shock after witnessing the titan of industry collapse during a pivotal board meeting. Doctors and nurses swarmed around him, medical jargon flying across the room as they worked to stabilize the 68-year-old man whose name adorned buildings throughout the city. "Blood pressure's dropping," a nurse called out, her voice tense as monitors beeped in warning. The attending physician grimaced, scanning the initial test results. "We need a transfusion immediately. His blood type is AB negative, one of the rarest. Call the blood bank." Minutes stretched like hours in the waiting room, where Nathan's executive team had gathered, their phones constantly buzzing with concerned board members and shareholders demanding updates. The company's stock was already falling on rumors of Nathan's condition. Just as the doctor emerged with a grim expression, the hospital entrance doors flew open. A woman in her mid-30s with dark auburn hair hurried in, her emerald eyes wide with worry. Despite her disheveled appearance, clearly having left whatever she'd been doing without a moment's hesitation, there was something striking about her presence, a quiet dignity that commanded attention. "I'm here for Nathan Wright," she announced, breathlessly approaching the reception desk. "I'm Olivia, his daughter." The executive team exchanged confused glances. Nathan Wright was known to be unmarried and childless. It was part of his mystique as London's most dedicated businessman. His life was his work. Everyone knew that. Within moments, the doctor had pulled Olivia aside, explaining the situation. In hushed, urgent tones, Nathan needed an immediate transfusion, but his blood type was exceptionally rare. The hospital's supply was limited, and there might not be enough time to source more. Without hesitation, Olivia rolled up her sleeve. "Test me, I may be negative too." The medical staff stared in disbelief. "How do you know your blood type?" the doctor asked, already motioning for a nurse to begin the test. Olivia's eyes never left the emergency room doors where Nathan had disappeared. "He adopted me 30 years ago when nobody else would," she said, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened to spill. "I'll do anything to save him." As the medical team rushed to prepare for the transfusion, the story of an unlikely father and daughter began to unfold, a journey that had begun exactly 3 decades earlier, in a place far removed from the wealth and prestige of Nathan Wright's world. 30 years earlier, the stately brick building of St. Margaret's Home for Children stood as a somber contrast to the vibrant autumn leaves that swirled around its grounds. Inside, 6-year-old Nina Sanders sat alone in the corner of the common room, while the other children practiced their songs and rehearsed their lines for the upcoming Visitors' Day. Every few months, potential adoptive parents would tour the orphanage, and the staff worked tirelessly to ensure the children made good impressions. Nina, however, showed little interest in the preparations. Small for her age, with unruly auburn, curls and striking green eyes, she focused intently on the paper before her. A worn-down pencil clutched in her small fingers as she sketched intricate patterns. The previous 3 visitor days had yielded no results for her. Couples always seemed drawn to the younger children, the babies, or the charming extroverts who could make them laugh within minutes of meeting. Nina was neither an infant nor particularly outgoing. She was simply Nina, quiet, observant, and lost in her own world of lines and shapes. Sister Margaret approached, her practical shoes squeaking against the polished floor. "Nina, dear, wouldn't you like to join the others? Mr. Preston is teaching everyone a lovely new song for tomorrow." Nina looked up briefly. "I'm making something." She returned to her drawing, adding meticulous details to what appeared to be a complex geometric design, unusually sophisticated for a child her age. Sister Margaret sighed but didn't push further. In her 30 years running the orphanage, She'd learned that each child coped differently with their circumstances. Nina had arrived just over a year ago, after her mother's death from illness and no known father to claim her. The girl rarely spoke of her past and had retreated into her artwork, creating increasing complex designs that the staff found both impressive and slightly unnerving for one so young. "Very well, but remember to wear your blue dress tomorrow, the one Mrs. Halley altered for you." With a gentle pat on Nina's shoulder, Sister Margaret moved on to resolve a squabble that had broken out near the piano. The next day arrived with a nervous energy pervading the orphanage. Children in their best clothes whispered excitedly about the visitors, particularly when word spread that Nathan Wright would be among them. Even at St. Margaret's, removed from the pulse of London's business world, his name carried weight. The story in the morning's paper that Wright Industries had donated a considerable sum to children's charities across the city had the staff speculating about his visit, though none really expected the notoriously work-focused bachelor to actually adopt. "It's just for the publicity," Mrs. Halley, the cook, had whispered to Mr. Preston. "Men like that don't change nappies or read bedtime stories." At precisely 2 o'clock, the visitors arrived. Couples in their 30s and 40s, a few single women with kind faces, and then, causing a stir among the staff, Nathan Wright himself imposing in a tailored suit that probably cost more than a month's operating expenses for the entire orphanage. At 43, he carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to command, his dark hair showing distinguished streaks of silver at the temples, his penetrating blue eyes taking in everything at once. His assistant, a nervous young man clutching a portfolio, trailed behind him. "Mr. Wright has a meeting at 4, he murmured to Sister Margaret. "We'll need to be efficient with this tour." The children performed their songs, recited poems, and did everything they could to appear adorable and adoptable. Nathan watched with measured politeness, occasionally nodding or smiling faintly, but his attention seemed divided. Anyone who knew him would recognize that he was simply fulfilling an obligation, a box to be checked for his company's social responsibility program. When the performances concluded, the visitors dispersed to interact with the children. Nathan found himself gravitating toward the quiet corner of the room, away from the noise and activity. That's where he noticed Nina, still absorbed in her drawing, seemingly unaware of the importance of the day. Curiosity piqued, he approached her. "Not interested in the performances?" he asked, his deep voice causing Nina to look up with a start. She blinked at him, taking in his expensive suit and commanding presence without the awe that usually greeted him. "I'm not very good at singing," she answered simply, then returned to her drawing. Instead of being offended by her lack of enthusiasm, a reaction that might have emerged from someone accustomed to deference, Nathan found himself intrigued. He lowered himself onto the small chair beside her, looking comically oversized in the children's furniture. "What are you drawing?" he asked, genuinely curious now. Nina hesitated, then turned her paper toward him. The design was astonishing, a series of interlocking geometric patterns that created an optical illusion of depth and movement. It wasn't the typical child's drawing of houses and stick figures. It was mathematical, precise, yet undeniably artistic. "It's remarkable," Nathan said, studying the complex patterns. "Did someone teach you to draw like this?" Nina shook her head. "I just see it in my head and then I make it with my pencil." She continued working, adding another layer to the design. "I like making patterns. They make sense even when other things don't." Something in her words resonated with Nathan. In his world of business analytics and market trends, he too found comfort in patterns and predictability. He watched as her small fingers worked with surprising dexterity, the pencil bringing order to the blank page. "Do you have many drawings?" "Like this one?" he asked. "Sister Margaret gives me paper when she can," Nina replied, not looking up. "But I have to be careful not to use too much. It's expensive." Nathan's assistant approached, checking his watch pointedly. "Mr. Wright, we should circulate before we need to leave for your next appointment." Nathan held up a hand to silence him, his focus unwavering from the child before him. "What's your name?" he asked her. "Nina Sanders," she replied, finally, setting down her pencil and meeting his gaze directly. In her striking green eyes, Nathan saw neither the desperation to please that the performing children had displayed, nor the timidity he might have expected. Instead, he found a clear, steady gaze that seemed to evaluate him as thoroughly as he was evaluating her. What happened next surprised everyone, most of all Nathan himself. Nina carefully tore her drawing from the pad and held it out to him. "You can have this one," she said, "since you like it." The gesture, simple, genuine, with no obvious attempt to curry favor, caught Nathan off guard. In his world, every gift came with strings attached, every kindness with an expected return. Yet here was this child, offering her creation with no apparent agenda. Nathan accepted the drawing with uncharacteristic care. "Thank you, Nina." As he stood to leave, something unfamiliar tugged at him, an impulse that had no place in his carefully structured life. Before he could analyze it, he found himself turning to Sister Margaret, who had been hovering nearby. "I'd like to discuss the adoption process," he stated, his decisive tone the same one he used to close multi-million-pound deals. The room seemed to freeze. His assistant's jaw dropped. Sister Margaret blinked rapidly, sure she had misheard. For Nina," she clarified, unable to hide her shock. Nathan nodded once, definitively. He turned back to Nina, who was watching the exchange with curious eyes. "Would you like that?" he asked, suddenly realizing he should confirm the child's willingness before proceeding with his impulsive decision. Nina tilted her head, considering him with a seriousness that seemed beyond her years. "Will there be more paper for drawing?" A rare smile crossed Nathan's face. "As much as you want," Nina nodded, as if they had just concluded a perfectly reasonable business transaction. "Okay." And so began the unlikeliest of partnerships, the cold, calculating business magnate and the quiet, artistically gifted orphan. Neither could have predicted how profoundly they would change each other's lives over the next 30 years, nor the dramatic circumstances that would eventually bring them full circle to Mayfair Memorial Hospital. The first months in Nathan Wright's Kensington mansion were a study in contrasts. Nina's few possessions, some worn clothes, a small collection of drawings, and a faded photograph of her mother, looked out of place in the opulent guest room that had been hastily converted into a child's bedroom. The staff, accustomed to maintaining Nathan's exacting standards and tightly scheduled life, now found themselves navigating the unpredictable needs of a 6-year-old girl. Nathan himself seemed perpetually surprised by his own decision. He had arranged all the practical aspects of Nina's care with his typical efficiency, hiring a nanny, enrolling her in London's most prestigious primary school, establishing a trust fund. But when faced with the actual child, he found himself at a loss. His daily schedule, normally planned to the minute, had no slot for bedtime stories or playground visits. His conversations, usually focused on market strategies and investment opportunities, faltered when directed toward a 6-year-old's experiences. Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper who had maintained Nathan's home for over a decade, became Nina's primary connection to her new environment. A warm, practical woman in her 50s, she took the child under her wing, explaining the unfamiliar household routines and offering reassurance when the mansion felt too big, too quiet, too unlike the lively chaos of St. Margaret's. "Mr. Wright is not used to children," Mrs. Chen explained one evening as she helped Nina arrange her few possessions in the cavernous bedroom. "But he has a good heart underneath all that business." Nina, arranging her drawings on the desk that was still too tall for her, nodded solemnly. "He doesn't smile much," Mrs. Chen chuckled. "No, not much, but he brought you here, didn't he? That says something important about him." Indeed, Nathan's decision had sent ripples through London's business community. The tabloids had a field day, the Ice King melts, and Wright's surprising move, business strategy or heartwarming. The more serious financial papers questioned the impact on Wright Industries' leadership, wondering if this unexpected personal development signaled a shift in Nathan's legendary focus. Nathan himself offered no explanations. When his board members delicately inquired about his new adopted daughter, he simply stated that his personal life was his own affair and promptly redirected discussions to quarterly projections. When his few friends expressed surprise, he changed the subject with practiced efficiency. Only in rare, unguarded moments did he himself ponder the impulse that had led him to bring Nina home. Sometimes, late at night, he would pause outside her bedroom door, listening to ensure she was sleeping soundly, and find himself staring at the drawing she had given him that first day, now professionally framed and hanging in his home office. There was something in the precision of her lines, the mathematical beauty of her patterns, that had spoken to him on a level he rarely accessed, the part of him that had originally fallen in love with engineering before the business empire had consumed his life. For Nina, the adjustment presented different challenges. The orphanage had been noisy, communal, and operated on strict schedules. Nathan's home was quiet, private, and paradoxically both rigidly scheduled in terms of household management, but chaotically unpredictable in terms of Nathan's presence. Some days he was gone before she woke and returned after she was asleep. Other days he worked from his home office, appearing briefly at meals where they would sit in awkward silence, both unsure how to bridge the gulf between them. School presented its own difficulties. At St. Catherine's Primary, Nina's classmates were the children of London's elite, confident, privileged, and immediately curious about the quiet girl who had suddenly been adopted by the famous Nathan. Right. Their questions were relentless and often unkind. "Is it true you were a charity case?" asked one pigtailed girl during Nina's first week. "My father says Mr. Wright probably adopted you for a tax write-off." Nina, who had never thought about concepts like tax advantages, had no response. She retreated further into silence, speaking only when directly addressed by teachers who praised her academic abilities, but expressed concern about her social integration. When the first parent-teacher conference arrived, Nathan rearranged an important business meeting to attend, sitting uncomfortably in a child-sized chair as Nina's teacher, Ms. Pembroke, reviewed her progress. "Nina's academic work is exceptional, particularly in mathematics and art," Ms. Pembroke explained, showing him Nina's recent projects. "Her spatial reasoning abilities are truly remarkable for her age. However, I'm concerned about her social development. She hasn't formed any friendships yet, and she rarely participates in group activities." Nathan frowned, uncomfortable with any suggestion of inadequacy in his unconventional ward. "She's adjusting to significant changes," he said defensively. "That takes time." Ms. Pembroke nodded sympathetically. "Of course, but children need social connections to thrive. Perhaps you could arrange some playdates, or involve her in after-school activities where she might meet children with similar interests." Nathan nodded stiffly, adding research playdates to his mental to-do list with the same approach he would apply to investigating a potential business acquisition. When he returned home, he immediately delegated the task to his personal assistant, who looked equally bewildered by the assignment. Meanwhile, Nina continued creating her intricate designs, now with the high-quality art supplies Nathan had instructed his staff to provide. Her bedroom walls gradually filled with her artwork, complex mandalas, geometric illusions, and patterns that seemed to fold space in impossible ways. It was as if she was creating her own world, one pattern at a time, to make sense of the dramatic changes in her life. The situation might have continued in this detached, parallel fashion indefinitely if not for the incident that occurred 6 months after Nina's arrival. Nathan had been preparing for a crucial presentation to potential international investors, a deal that could expand Wright Industries into Asian markets. The presentation materials, meticulously prepared and organized in a leather portfolio, sat on his desk, awaiting his final review. That same afternoon, Nina had returned from school particularly subdued after another day of navigating the complicated social hierarchy of St. Catherine's. Seeking comfort in her art, she had brought her latest drawing to Nathan's home office, hoping to show him the new technique she had developed for creating the illusion of movement in her patterns. Finding the office empty but the door open, she had waited, idly examining the imposing desk with its organized stacks of documents. A glass of water sat perilously close to the leather portfolio as Nina reached out to move the glass to a safer position. Her elbow knocked against it, sending water cascading across the desktop and directly onto the portfolio. Her attempts to quickly blot the water only made things worse, smearing the carefully printed graphs and spreadsheets. By the time Nathan returned to the office, Nina was frantically trying to dry the documents with tissues, her own artwork forgotten on the floor. Nathan's reaction was immediate and volcanic. The pressure of the upcoming deal, combined with the shock of seeing weeks of preparation potentially ruined, broke through his usual controlled demeanor. His voice rose to a volume that had never before echoed through the mansion's halls. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he demanded, surveying the wet-smeared documents in horror. "These can't be replaced before tomorrow's meeting. Do you understand what this means?" Nina, who had never before witnessed Nathan's anger, backed away, her face pale with shock and fear. Without a word, she fled the office, leaving Nathan to salvage what he could of the presentation materials. It was only after several hours of emergency reprinting and reorganizing, with his assistant called in to help, that Nathan emerged from his crisis mode and realized he had not seen Nina since the incident. A twinge of unfamiliar guilt prompted him to check her bedroom. The door was closed, unusual for that time of evening. He knocked lightly, receiving no response. When he cautiously opened the door, the sight that greeted him stopped him cold. Nina sat on the floor beside her bed, her small suitcase open before her. Inside were her few original possessions from the orphanage, carefully packed. Her new clothes and art supplies remained untouched in their proper places. She looked up at Nathan with red-rimmed eyes but a composed expression. "I'm ready to go back now," she said quietly. "Back?" Nathan repeated, momentarily confused. "Back where?" "To St. Margaret's," Nina replied, as if it were obvious. "I ruined your important papers. I know you won't want me to stay anymore." The simple statement, delivered with such certainty, hit Nathan with unexpected force. In Nina's world, shaped by the loss of her mother and the impermanence of the orphanage, his anger had not merely been a momentary outburst, but confirmation of what she had perhaps been expecting all along, that her place in his home was conditional and temporary. Something shifted in Nathan at that moment, something fundamental in how he viewed both Nina and himself. He crossed the room slowly and lowered himself to sit on the floor beside her, his expensive suit incongruous against the plush carpet. "Nina," he said, his voice deliberately gentle, "I was angry about the papers. That was wrong of me, but I never ever meant that I wanted you to leave." She studied his face with that penetrating gaze that had first caught his attention at the orphanage. "But at St. Margaret's, Sister Margaret said that's why so many of us were there. Because when things get hard, some people don't want to try anymore." The brutal honesty of her assessment, and its uncomfortable proximity to how Nathan had approached many of his personal relationships, left him momentarily speechless. How many business partners had he discarded when arrangements became complicated? How many friendships had he allowed to fade when they required too much effort to maintain? "That's not going to happen with us," he said finally, with a decisiveness that surprised even himself. "When I adopted you, I made a commitment. Do you know what that means?" Nina shook her head slightly. "It means that we're family now, no matter what happens. Even if you spill water on 1,000 presentations, even if I get unreasonably angry sometimes, we're stuck with each other." Nina considered this, her analytical mind visibly processing his words. "Like a pattern that doesn't break?" she asked, referring to the concepts in her artwork. Nathan nodded, grateful for the metaphor. "Exactly like that. Sometimes the pattern gets complicated or changes direction, but it remains connected." Slowly, Nina unpacked her small suitcase, returning her few possessions to their places. Nathan helped, handling the faded photograph of her mother with particular care. "Tell me about her," he said, nodding toward the photograph. For the first time since arriving at the mansion, Nina began to speak about her past, about her mother's laugh, about how they had made up stories together before bedtime, about the illness that had gradually taken her away. Nathan listened, really listened, without checking his watch or thinking about work emails. When she finally grew tired, Nathan did something he had never done before. He helped her into bed, pulled the covers up, and somewhat awkwardly sat beside her until she fell asleep. It was a small moment, unremarkable in most families, but for Nathan and Nina it represented a first genuine step toward becoming one. The portfolio incident marked a turning point in their relationship. Nathan didn't suddenly transform into a conventionally affectionate father. His personality and decades of emotional habits resisted such dramatic change, but he began making consistent efforts to understand and connect with Nina. He arranged his schedule to be home for dinner 3 nights a week. He learned to ask specific questions about her school projects rather than vague inquiries about her day. Most significantly, he began to take a genuine interest in her artistic development, researching art programs and museums they could visit together. For her part, Nina gradually relaxed her guard, allowing herself to believe in the permanence Nathan had promised. She began to develop her own daily routines within the structure of the household, forming a particular bond with Mrs. Chen, who taught her to make dumplings in the spacious kitchen and shared stories of her own childhood in Hong Kong. Slowly, she adapted to her new school, finding a small niche among the more academically focused students who appreciated her unique perspective. If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content for you. Continuing. As the months stretched into years, the unusual household settled into its own rhythm. Nathan remained driven and often distant, absorbed in the expansion of his business empire, but the moments of connection with Nina became more frequent and genuine. There were still misunderstandings and awkward conversations, still times when the gulf between their worlds seemed unbridgeable, but beneath these challenges ran a strengthening current of mutual respect and gradually affection. By Nina's 11th birthday, the changes in their relationship were subtle but significant. When Nathan presented her with a professional-grade drafting table for her increasingly sophisticated artwork, his usual clinical efficiency in gift-giving was tempered by a thoughtful attention to the specific features she had admired in a design magazine. When Nina thanked him, the formal politeness that had characterized their early interactions had evolved into a more natural warmth. Yet challenges remained, particularly as Nina entered adolescence and the complexities of her identity as Nathan Wright's adopted daughter intensified. At 13, now attending St. Catherine's Secondary School, she found herself increasingly targeted by a particular group of girls led by Victoria Harrington, daughter of one of Nathan's business competitors. "Is it true your real mother was a cleaning lady?" Victoria asked loudly during lunch one day, her circle of friends giggling in anticipation of Nina's reaction. "Daddy says Mr. Wright probably felt sorry for you. Charity case and all that." Nina, now taller but still slender, with her auburn hair typically pulled back in a practical ponytail, looked up from her mathematics textbook. In the years since her adoption, she had developed not only artistically, but academically, particularly excelling in mathematics and design. The combination had earned her both academic recognition and increased social isolation among peers who found her interests unusual and her background suspicious. "My mother was a bookshop assistant," Nina replied evenly, her green eyes meeting Victoria's with a steady gaze that was reminiscent of Nathan's boardroom stare. "And your father's company lost 6% of its market share last quarter, according to the Financial Times. Perhaps he should focus more on that than on me." Victoria's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "You think you're so smart just because Wright took you in, but everyone knows you'll never really belong in our world." The word stung, touching on Nina's deepest insecurities, but years of navigating between the orphanage, Nathan's world, and school had taught her to mask her reactions. She returned to her textbook, outwardly calm, while inwardly processing the familiar pain of being reminded of her uncertain place in the social hierarchy. That evening, as she worked on a particularly complex geometric design in her bedroom-turned-studio, Nathan appeared at her door, a rare occurrence that immediately signaled something important. "Mrs. Chen mentioned there might have been some trouble at school today," he said, awkwardly hovering at the threshold, still uncomfortable with direct emotional conversations, even after years as Nina's guardian. Nina shrugged, adding another precise line to her drawing. "Nothing unusual, just Victoria Harrington being Victoria Harrington." Nathan frowned. The Harrington name immediately registered. James Harrington was indeed a competitor whose company had been struggling against Wright Industries' recent innovations. What did she say? "The usual, that I don't belong in their world, that you adopted me out of pity." Nina kept her tone casual, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her affected nonchalance. Something hardened in Nathan's expression, a flash of the ruthless businessman who had built his empire from nothing. "Would you like me to speak with the school? Or with Harrington directly?" Nina looked up, alarmed. "No, that would only make it worse." She set down her pencil, turning to face him fully. "I handled it, Nathan. I always do." He studied her for a moment, recognizing in her self-reliance a quality he had always valued in himself. Yet there was something troubling about seeing it in someone so young, something that suggested failure on his part to provide the security she deserved. "How?" he asked simply. A small, wry smile crossed Nina's face. "I mentioned that Harrington Enterprises lost 6% of its market share last quarter." Nathan's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You follow the financial news?" Nina shrugged again. "I like to know what's happening in your world. It helps me understand why you're stressed sometimes, or why you have to travel suddenly." She hesitated, then added, "And I like the patterns in the market reports. They're like my geometric designs, complex but logical if you know how to read them." Nathan found himself momentarily speechless. While he'd been focusing on providing material support and educational opportunities, Nina had been quietly studying his world, developing her own understanding of the forces that shaped their unusual family dynamic. Moreover, she had been applying her unique pattern recognition abilities to areas beyond art, including business analytics, a field in which Nathan himself had built his initial success. "That's impressive," he said finally, the understated praise significant coming from someone known for his exacting standards. "But about Victoria and the others, there are more direct ways to address bullying. I could arrange a meeting with the headmistress." "I don't want special treatment because I'm your daughter," Nina interrupted, a hint of steel in her voice. "That would just prove Victoria right, that I can't handle things on my own, that I only have value because of my connection to you." The statement hung in the air between them, revealing a depth to Nina's struggle that Nathan had not fully appreciated. She wasn't just dealing with typical teenage social dynamics. She was constantly navigating questions of legitimacy, belonging, and identity that were directly tied to her relationship with him. After a long moment, Nathan nodded, respecting her autonomy in a way that reflected his growing recognition of her maturity. "Your approach seems to have been effective," he acknowledged. "But if the situation escalates, I expect you to tell me. Understood?" Nina nodded, sensing both the concern and the respect in his directive. As Nathan turned to leave, she called after him, "How did the Shanghai negotiation go? You seemed worried about it last week." Nathan paused, surprised again by her awareness. Most adults in his life knew better than to ask direct questions about ongoing business deals. "We reached an agreement this afternoon," he said. "How did you know about Shanghai?" Nina smiled slightly. "You left the prospectus on the kitchen counter last Thursday. The projections looked promising, but there was a currency exchange risk that seemed concerning on page 17. Nathan stared at her for a long moment, seeing her in a new light, not just as his unconventional adopted daughter, but as a perceptive young mind with potential he had perhaps underestimated. "Would you like me to explain how we addressed that?" "Risk?" he asked, the question representing a significant shift in how he viewed their relationship. Nina's face brightened with genuine interest. "Yes, I would." That night marked another evolution in their bond. Sitting in Nathan's home office, with the framed geometric drawing, her first gift to him, watching over them, he explained the intricacies of international currency hedging while she listened attentively, asking questions that revealed both her mathematical aptitude and her innate business acumen. As they talked, Nathan found himself wondering about the paths Nina might take as she grew older. He had never pressured her to consider following in his footsteps. In truth, he had given little thought to her eventual career, focusing instead on providing her with the best education and opportunities. But now, observing her quick grasp of complex financial concepts, he began to see possibilities he hadn't previously considered. For Nina, the evening represented a new kind of connection with the man who had become her father in practice, if not always in demonstrative affection. His world of business strategy and market analysis offered a different but complementary arena for her love of patterns and problem-solving. While art remained her primary passion, she found herself increasingly drawn to understanding the patterns that governed Nathan's work, and by extension their life together. The following years brought further developments in Nina's education and talents. By 15, she had developed a distinctive artistic style that combined her mathematical precision with increasingly bold color choices and themes. Her work began, attracting attention beyond school competitions, with a local gallery, featuring 3 of her pieces in a young artist's showcase. Nathan attended the opening night, standing somewhat stiffly in his bespoke suit among the more eclectic art crowd, but undeniably proud as visitors praised Nina's unique aesthetic vision. It was during her 15th birthday celebration, a small affair by right standards but more elaborate than previous years, that Nathan witnessed another dimension of Nina's developing capabilities. He had hired an upscale catering company to manage the event, which included Nina's few school friends, Mrs. Chen, and other household staff who had become like family, and a handful of Nathan's more approachable business associates who had watched Nina grow up. During the party, Nina quietly approached the catering manager, engaged in a brief conversation, and then returned to her guests. Later, Nathan overheard the manager instructing his staff to implement several changes to the service approach. Curious, he pulled Nina aside. "What were you discussing with the caterer?" he asked. Nina looked slightly embarrassed at being caught. "I noticed their service pattern was inefficient. They were making too many trips back to the kitchen because they were grouping the hors d'oeuvres by type rather than by serving area. I suggested a different arrangement that would reduce their steps by about 30%. Nathan blinked, momentarily taken aback by the practical business application of her pattern recognition skills. "And they implemented your suggestion?" Nina nodded. The manager said it was smart. He asked if I'd ever worked in event planning. As the evening progressed, Nathan observed the catering staff's movements with newfound attention, noting the indeed improved efficiency after Nina's intervention. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it represented something significant. Nina's ability to not just recognize patterns, but to optimize systems, to see opportunities for improvement where others saw only standard procedures. 2 weeks later, Nathan did something unprecedented. He invited Nina to join him for lunch with a potential client, an informal meeting at a restaurant rather than the office, but a business engagement nonetheless. When his assistant questioned the unusual inclusion, Nathan merely stated that Nina had shown interest in understanding more about Wright Industries' operations. During the lunch, Nathan deliberately created an opening for Nina to share an observation about the client's product packaging, how a simple adjustment to the design could improve both shipping efficiency and shelf appeal. The client, initially surprised to be receiving feedback from a teenager, quickly recognized the value in her suggestion. By the end of the meal, not only had Nathan secured the contract, but the client had specifically requested that the young design consultant be involved in the packaging redesign process. As they drove back to the office, Nina looked out the window, processing what had just occurred. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally. "Set me up to impress your client." Nathan kept his eyes on the road, his hands precise at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel as always. "I didn't set you up to do anything. I created an opportunity for you to demonstrate your capabilities. You did the rest yourself." "But why?" Nina pressed, turning to study his profile. "You've never involved me in your work before." Nathan was silent for a moment, formulating his response with the same care he applied to business negotiations. "Because I've been watching you grow into someone with extraordinary patterns of thought," he said finally, "and I've realized I've been negligent in not exposing you to all the potential applications of your abilities." Nina absorbed this, recognizing the underlying message. Nathan was beginning to see her not just as his ward, but as someone with potential value in his professional world, a world that defined so much of his identity. "Does this mean you want me to work for Wright Industries someday?" Nina asked, the question hanging between them as the car glided through London's busy streets. Nathan considered this carefully. "It means I want you to have options," he replied. "Your artistic talent is extraordinary, but you also have an analytical mind that could excel in business. I simply want you to explore all possibilities." Nina nodded, thoughtful. "I've been reading about something called social entrepreneurship," she said hesitantly, "using business principles to solve social problems. It combines creativity with practical applications." A flicker of surprise crossed Nathan's face. Social causes had never been his priority. Profit and growth had always driven his decisions. Yet he found himself nodding. "An interesting field. Perhaps we should look into some programs that focus on that area." This conversation marked another evolution in their relationship. Nathan began occasionally bringing Nina to informal business meetings, introducing her as his daughter with unmistakable pride. For her part, Nina absorbed everything she observed, developing her understanding of the business world while continuing to pursue her artistic passions. As Nina entered her final years of secondary school, the question of university loomed. Nathan assumed she would follow the traditional path of elite business education, Oxford, Cambridge, or perhaps Harvard, or Wharton in the States. He was therefore caught off guard when, during dinner one evening, Nina announced her intention to apply to the Royal College of Art's innovative program in design engineering, which combined creative design with social impact. "It's not traditional business," she acknowledged, watching his reaction carefully, "but it aligns with my interests in both design and systems thinking." Nathan set down his fork, his expression unreadable. "And right industries? I had assumed you might consider joining after university." "I'm not saying I won't," Nina replied carefully, "but I want to explore different approaches first. The business world could benefit from more socially conscious models." The implied criticism of his own business philosophy wasn't lost on Nathan. A tense silence fell between them, echoing the emotional distance that still sometimes emerged despite years of progress. "I see," he said finally. "It's your decision, of course." The conversation ended there, but the underlying tension persisted. As Nina completed her applications and received offers, including one from the prestigious Royal College of Art, Nathan maintained a polite interest that didn't quite mask his disappointment. He had grown accustomed to their shared interest in business strategy, to Nina's fresh perspective on his work. Her choice to pursue a different path felt like a rejection, though he would never admit this vulnerability. The summer before Nina left for university, their relationship reached another critical juncture. At 21, Nina had decided to move into her own apartment rather than commuting from Nathan's home. "I need to experience independence," she explained as she packed her art supplies. "I can't keep living in your world forever." Nathan, now in his late 50s with more silver than black in his hair, stood in the doorway of her studio, watching her dismantle the creative space she had built over 15 years. "The offer to stay remains open," he said stiffly. "There's no need to rush into independence." Nina paused, looking up at him with a gentle smile. "I know. But this is important to me. I need to find my own path, not just follow the one that's been laid out for me." The words stung more than Nathan expected. "I've never dictated your path," he said, a defensive edge in his voice. "Not explicitly," Nina acknowledged. "But your world is powerful, Nathan. It's easy to get caught in its gravity without realizing it." Nathan had no response to this. He retreated to his office, burying himself in work as was his habit when emotions threatened to overwhelm his carefully maintained control. When Nina's friends arrived to help her move the following weekend, he made a brief appearance, said a cordial goodbye, and returned to his spreadsheets. It was Mrs. Chen who hugged Nina tightly, who promised to keep her room ready for visits, who wiped away tears as the door closed behind the young woman who had brought unexpected life to the once sterile mansion. The following months saw minimal contact between them. Nina threw herself into her studies, exploring design methodologies that prioritized social impact. Nathan expanded Right Industries into emerging markets, working longer hours than ever. Their occasional dinners were pleasant but superficial, neither willing to breach the growing distance. Then, 6 months into this strained new normal, everything changed. Nathan collapsed during a board meeting, his legendary stamina finally giving way after decades of relentless work. The diagnosis was serious: a heart condition exacerbated by stress and neglect of his health. Surgery was required, and the prognosis, while positive with proper care, included a stark warning about lifestyle changes. Nina put her studies on pause, moving temporarily back to the mansion to oversee Nathan's care after the surgery. There, roles reversed as she managed his medication schedule, enforced the doctor's restrictions, and fielded concerned calls from business associates. Nathan, unused to dependence or physical limitation, made for a difficult patient. His frustration at his weakness manifested as irritability, testing Nina's patience daily. One evening, as she sorted through the paperwork that had accumulated during his hospitalization, Nina discovered something unexpected, a folder containing detailed information about children's charities and educational initiatives across London. As she read through the material, she realized that Nathan had been quietly funding scholarships for orphaned children through a foundation established in her name. The revelation left her momentarily breathless. For all his emotional reticence, for all his focus on profit and business expansion, Nathan had been using his wealth to create opportunities for children like she had once been, and he had done so without publicity or recognition, without ever mentioning it to her. When she confronted him with her discovery, Nathan seemed almost embarrassed. "It seemed logical," he said dismissively, waving away her questions. "Education made a difference for you. It could do the same for others." But Nina was not deterred. "How long has this been happening? How many children have received scholarships?" Nathan sighed, reluctantly sharing the details. The foundation had been established 10 years earlier, shortly after the night they had discussed business strategy following the Victoria Harrington incident. It had grown steadily, now supporting over 50 children annually through education from primary school through university. "Why didn't you tell me?" Nina asked, sitting at the edge of his bed, the folder clutched in her hands. Nathan hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "It wasn't relevant to your development," he said finally, "and I preferred to keep it separate from Wright Industries' corporate social responsibility initiatives. This was personal." The admission that something in Nathan's life was deliberately separated from his business identity, that he had been influenced by her experience to take action that had no profit motive, shifted something fundamental in Nina's understanding of the man who had raised her. During his recovery, their conversations gradually deepened. Nina shared more about her university projects, her vision for design that served social needs without sacrificing economic viability. Nathan, perhaps softened by his brush with mortality, listened with genuine interest rather than automatic skepticism. "It's not that different from what you've been doing with the Scholarship Foundation," Nina pointed out one afternoon as she showed him sketches for a low-cost water filtration system she was designing. "Using resources to create positive impact." Nathan considered this. "Perhaps," he conceded, "though I maintain that a business must prioritize profitability to be sustainable." "What if the profit isn't just financial?" Nina challenged. "What if social benefit is part of how we measure success?" These philosophical discussions continued throughout Nathan's recovery, gradually healing the rift that had formed between them. By the time he was cleared to return to work on a limited schedule, something had shifted in their relationship. A new balance had emerged, with Nina's idealism and Nathan's pragmatism finding points of complementary strength rather than inevitable conflict. Nina returned to her studies with renewed focus, maintaining closer contact with Nathan through weekly dinners and occasional visits to Wright Industries headquarters, where she observed operations with her designer's eye, sometimes offering perspectives that challenged Nathan's traditional approach. "Will this narrative ever end? Will you make it to the end of the story with me? Has anyone in your life ever adopted someone or been adopted themselves? Let me know in the comments below." As graduation approached, Nina faced the decision she had been contemplating for years. What role, if any, she would play in Wright Industries' future? Nathan, recovered but permanently affected by his health scare, had begun considering succession planning, something he had previously avoided despite his board's urging. When Nina presented her final university project, a comprehensive business model for sustainable manufacturing that prioritized both environmental impact and worker welfare while maintaining competitive profit margins. She was surprised to find Nathan in the audience, quietly observing from the back row. His presence, unannounced and unexpected, spoke volumes about how far they had come. After her successful presentation, as they walked through the exhibition of graduating students' work, Nathan surprised her again. "Wright Industries could implement aspects of your model," he said casually, as if discussing the weather, "perhaps starting with the Manchester facility." Nina stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "Are you serious?" Nathan nodded, his expression contemplative. "Your approach has merit. It would require significant adjustments to our operations, but the long-term benefits could outweigh the transitional costs." "This isn't just to get me to join the company, is it?" Nina asked skeptically. A rare smile crossed Nathan's face. "Would that work?" Nina laughed, shaking her head. "I'd need more than one pilot project." "What would it take?" Nathan asked, suddenly serious. "Hypothetically speaking, what would Wright Industries need to become for you to consider being part of its future?" The directness of the question caught Nina off guard. For years, she had assumed Nathan wanted her to simply continue his legacy, to maintain Wright Industries exactly as he had built it. The possibility that he might be open to transformation, that he might see value in her different vision, had never seemed realistic. "It would need to balance profit with purpose," she said carefully. "To recognize that business has power to address social challenges, not just generate wealth. It would need to be willing to innovate, not just in products, but in its fundamental approach to success." Nathan nodded slowly. "Ambitious," he commented, "but not impossible." The conversation planted a seed that would grow over the following years. Nina accepted a position with a renowned design consultancy after graduation, gaining experience outside Wright Industries while maintaining her connection with Nathan. Their weekly dinners continued, conversations evolving from philosophical debates to practical discussions about business transformation and organizational change. 3 years after Nina's graduation, Wright Industries faced an unprecedented challenge. A rival corporation launched an aggressive takeover attempt, exploiting a temporary downturn in Wright's stock, following some necessary but expensive sustainability upgrades Nathan had begun implementing, changes influenced by his ongoing conversations with Nina. The crisis brought their relationship to a crucial juncture. The board urged Nathan to fight the takeover by doubling down on cost-cutting measures and abandoning the sustainability initiatives. Analysts predicted Wright Industries would need to revert to its traditional profit-first approach to survive. In the midst of this turmoil, Nina arrived at Nathan's office unannounced, carrying a portfolio of documents. "I have a proposal," she said without preamble, "a way to fight the takeover while accelerating the transformation, not abandoning it." Nathan, exhausted from emergency board meetings but still commanding behind his desk, raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." What followed was an extraordinary strategy session that lasted well into the night. Nina presented a radical approach, repositioning Wright Industries as a pioneer in what she called integrated value creation, a model that explicitly connected social and environmental impact to long-term financial performance. Her plan included innovative financing structures, strategic partnerships with social enterprises, and a comprehensive communication strategy that would position the takeover attempt as backward-looking and Wright Industries as the future of business. "It's risky," Nathan acknowledged as they reviewed the final elements of the plan at 3 a.m., coffee cups scattered across his desk. "The markets may not understand what we're trying to do." "Some won't," Nina agreed, "but others will. And we don't need everyone. We just need enough forward-thinking investors who recognize that business is changing." Nathan studied her across the desk, confident, brilliant, and passionate about a vision of business that differed significantly from how he had operated for decades. Yet he could see the practical strategy underlying her idealism, the rigorous analysis that supported her proposals. She had become something he had never anticipated, not a replica of himself, but a synthesis of his strategic mind, with a vision entirely her own. "If we do this," he said finally, You'll need to be part of implementing it. Not as a consultant, but as a Wright Industries executive. Nina hesitated. For years, she had maintained her independence, building her reputation separate from Nathan's influence. Joining Wright Industries now would inevitably raise questions about nepotism, about whether she had earned her position. "People will talk," she said, voicing her concern. Nathan dismisses this with a wave of his hand. "People always talk. What matters is results." The next morning, Wright Industries announced a bold new strategic direction and an equally bold addition to its executive team, Nina Wright, appointed as Chief Innovation Officer, with a mandate to lead the company's transformation. The following months were among the most challenging and exhilarating of both their lives. The takeover battle became a high-stakes public drama, with Nina emerging as the unexpected face of Wright Industries' future. Her articulate defense of the integrated value model, combining her designer's vision with hard business metrics, gradually shifted market perception. Younger investors rallied behind the vision, followed by institutional investors impressed by the detailed implementation plans that supported Nina's inspiring rhetoric. Nathan, stepping partially back from the spotlight for the first time in his career, provided strategic guidance and institutional knowledge, while allowing Nina to lead the public response. Their partnership, pragmatic yet visionary, experienced yet innovative, proved more effective than either could have been alone. 6 months into the crisis, the tide turned decisively. The rival corporation withdrew its takeover bid as Wright Industries' stock stabilized and then began to climb steadily. Industry publications that had initially been skeptical began featuring analyses of the Wright transformation as a potential blueprint for traditional companies navigating changing market expectations. The night the takeover threat officially ended, Nathan and Nina shared a quiet dinner at the mansion, just the two of them, with Mrs. Chen preparing their favorite dishes to celebrate. As they toasted their success, Nathan became uncharacteristically reflective. "When I adopted you, I had no idea what I was doing," he admitted, swirling the water in his glass, alcohol now prohibited by his heart condition. "I saw an unusual child who thought differently. I thought perhaps I could provide opportunities, open doors." He paused, meeting her eyes directly. "I never imagined you would eventually open doors for me." Nina smiled, touched by the rare emotional acknowledgement. "We've come a long way from that first drawing," she said, glancing toward his office where her childhood artwork still hung. "It's still one of my favorites," Nathan replied, "the beginning of a pattern that kept evolving in ways I couldn't have predicted." As their professional partnership deepened, Nina continued pushing the boundaries of Wright Industries' transformation. The company established an innovation lab focused on developing solutions for urban challenges, launched a venture fund supporting social entrepreneurs, and implemented progressive workplace policies that attracted top talent from competitors. Profits remained strong, sometimes dipping during periods of investment, but rebounding as the integrated approach gained traction and efficiency. Nathan, approaching 70 and increasingly conscious of his legacy, began gradually transitioning more responsibility to Nina. The board, initially skeptical of his unconventional succession plan, had been won over by Nina's performance during the takeover crisis and her subsequent leadership. When Nathan proposed formally naming her as his successor, the vote was unanimous. The announcement was scheduled for the company's annual leadership conference, a fitting stage for what business publications were already calling one of the most remarkable corporate transformations and succession stories of the decade. The night before the event, Nathan was finishing preparations for his speech when he felt the first warning signs. Dismissing them as pre-speech nerves, he continued working until the pain became impossible to ignore. By morning, he was in Mayfair Memorial Hospital, doctors concerned about his heart readings, with the conference proceeding without him. Nina delivered the succession announcement herself, accepting the role with grace while expressing concern for Nathan's health. Immediately afterward, she rushed to the hospital where doctors delivered troubling news. Nathan needed an immediate procedure requiring blood transfusions, but his rare blood type complicated matters. Which brings us back to where our story began. Nina rolling up her sleeve, stating with absolute certainty, "Test me. I'm AB negative too. As the medical team prepared for the procedure, Nina sat beside Nathan's hospital bed, their hands clasped in a rare physical demonstration of their bond. "How did you know your blood type matched mine?" Nathan asked, his voice weaker than she had ever heard it. "I've always known," Nina replied. "Mrs. Chen told me years ago, when you first had heart issues. She thought I should be aware, just in case." She squeezed his hand gently. "Even then, I think she knew we were connected by more than just legal documents." Nathan nodded, understanding the deeper truth in her words. Their connection had evolved from a chance encounter into something neither could have anticipated. A bond forged through years of challenge and growth, of learning to understand perspectives fundamentally different from their own. They were family not by blood but by choice, by persistence, by the daily decision to remain in each other's lives despite the difficulties. "There's something I need to tell you," Nathan said, his voice serious despite his weakened state. "In my home office behind the painting, your first drawing, there's a safe." Nina nodded, familiar with its existence, though not its contents. "The combination is your birthday," Nathan continued. "Inside you'll find letters." "Letters?" Nina repeated, confused. "I've written to you every year since I adopted you," Nathan explained, a hint of embarrassment coloring his admission. "Things I wanted to say but didn't know how. About watching you grow, about how you've changed my perspective. I never intended to show them to you, but now—" He gestured vaguely at the hospital room, the monitors tracking his heartbeat. Nina felt tears threatening, but maintained her composure, knowing Nathan's discomfort with excessive emotion. "Save your strength," she said gently. "You can tell me everything after the procedure. We still have work to do transforming Right Industries." The procedure was successful. Nina's blood flowing into Nathan created a physical manifestation of the connection that had developed between them over 30 years, from the uncertain beginning at St. Margaret's to their current partnership as the past and future of Right Industries. During Nathan's recovery, Nina split her time between the hospital, the company, and occasional visits to the mansion where, true to Nathan's instructions, she found dozens of letters chronicling their journey from his perspective. Reading them was like discovering a different side of the man who had raised her. The emotions he had felt, but rarely expressed, the pride in her accomplishments, the gradual evolution of his thinking about business and purpose that had begun long before he had openly acknowledged it. One letter in particular, written after her university graduation, stood out. "Nina, today I watched you present your vision for a different kind of business, one that measures success not just in profit but in impact. 24 years ago, when I brought you home, I thought I was providing you an opportunity. I see now that you have provided me with something far more valuable, a challenge to the limitations of my thinking. I built Right Industries to prove something, to show that I could succeed by the traditional metrics of wealth and influence. You have shown me that there are other metrics worth considering, other forms of success that may ultimately prove more lasting. I do not know if you will ever choose to be part of Right Industries. I find I care less about that than about knowing you will carry forward your vision wherever your path leads. The world needs more people who see patterns differently, who question assumptions, who believe business can serve humanity rather than merely profit from it. You have my respect, which I give rarely. More importantly, you have my love, which I express poorly but feel completely." Nathan. When Nathan was finally released from the hospital, he returned to a world that had shifted subtly during his absence. Nina had accelerated certain initiatives, adjusted others, and maintained the company's momentum while simultaneously managing his medical care. The experience had proven definitively that she was ready for leadership, not because she replicated his approach, but because she had developed her own effective style that complemented and extended what he had built. 6 months later, at a more modest ceremony than originally planned, Nathan formally stepped down as CEO, transferring leadership to Nina while maintaining an advisory role as chairman emeritus. The business press covered the transition extensively, marveling at the unlikely story. The orphaned girl who had become heir to one of London's most successful companies, the cold businessman whose approach had been transformed through an unexpected act of adoption. On the night of the transition ceremony, after the speeches and congratulations, Nathan and Nina returned to the mansion for a private celebration with Mrs. Chen and the handful of people who had been part of their journey from the beginning. As the evening wound down, Nina found Nathan in his home office, now rarely used but still maintained exactly as it had been during his years of active leadership. He stood before the framed drawing, her first gift to him, with its intricate geometric pattern created by a 6-year-old's hands. "It still makes sense," he commented as she joined him. "Your pattern. After all these years, I still see new aspects of it." Nina studied the drawing, seeing it through both her childhood memories and her trained designer's eye. "That's the thing about good patterns," she replied. "They evolve and reveal new dimensions over time, but the core structure remains connected." Nathan nodded, understanding the metaphor that had come to define their relationship. "Right industries will be different under your leadership," he said. "Not a question, but an acknowledgement." "Yes," Nina agreed, "but its foundations will remain strong." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Nathan said, placing a hand on her shoulder in a rare gesture of physical affection. "Patterns that cannot evolve eventually break. You taught me that." As they stood together, the millionaire businessman and the orphan artist who had become his heir in every sense that mattered, they represented a pattern that neither could have designed alone, a connection forged through 3 decades of challenge and growth, of seeing the world through each other's eyes, of finding strength in their differences rather than merely their similarities. The true wealth Nathan Wright had accumulated wasn't measured in the buildings bearing his name or the company's stock value. It lay in the transformation of 2 lives, his and Nina's, through the unexpected intersection of their paths. And the true inheritance Nina received wasn't the company or its resources, but the understanding that belonging comes not from conforming to others' expectations, but from the courage to bring your unique perspective to every relationship and institution you touch. Together, they had created something neither could have imagined that day at St. Margaret's, a family defined not by blood, but by choice, a business redefined by purpose beyond profit, and a legacy that would continue evolving long after both. Some of them were gone. Congratulations. Type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.